guys, it's Mona, and in today's video I want to talk about 3 natural remedies for depression. I think this topic needs to be discussed more. I think that mental health and well-being is just as important, if not more important than physical health, if I had to pick one. And I think depression is way more common than most people lead on, especially, with work stress, family stress. Sometimes it's short term, sometimes it can be long term. And I just wanted to give you guys some natural treatment alternatives, or these could also be in supplementation to something you're taking. I do want to definitely say, if you are experiencing depression, if you are seeing a doctor for it, this is not meant in any way to change your treatment. You should, of course, talk to your doctor about it, but more so just to educate you on some natural alternatives, and then you and your doctor can decide together what you think is best. There are so many different modalities to depression and ways to target, treating it, because it can be caused from so many different things. The focus of most of today's video is actually on cortisol, and I just want to explain the really strong relationship between cortisol and depression, and then these treatments are mostly kind of targeted to lower your cortisol. So let's just quickly do a background on cortisol. We've all heard of this, oh, my cortisol is really high, like if you're working out or if you're stressed. So cortisol is a stress hormone we have in our body that we produce, and we do need it oftentimes. It's very helpful at certain times, but oftentimes it's too high. So basically it regulates everything, our blood sugar, our blood pressure, our stress. It's used for fight or flight. So there's times when we definitely need it and it can save us in situations, but when it's too high, this is when it can lead to anxiety, nervousness, your mood changes. And when it's too high for continued amount of time, this is when it can lead to depression, among other things. So let's talk about how to reduce cortisol naturally and how that can actually help with depression. So you might not think if you feel a little bit jittery a lot, sometimes if your cortisol is off, it can be high at certain times when it's not supposed to, or low at certain times. You might not realize that can lead to depression, but I also wanted to share this because this could also be great for prevention, especially if depression runs in your family. This is something that can be hereditary if there's a certain gene for it. If there's, anyone in your family had it, I think it's definitely worth just paying attention to and making sure that whenever you start to feel off, that you're on top of all the remedies. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of lowering cortisol is actually not on this table, and it is mantras. So you may have heard the word mantra. It's probably more common now, as I feel like as a society in general, we're definitely a little more spiritually aligned and connected to mental health and well-being. But a mantra is basically a word, a group of words, a phrase. It's basically just focused repetition on something that will help you relax, soothe you, reduce agitation, reduce stress. I talk about mantras in meditation. I practice transcendental meditation, and it's mantra based. So the mantra that I use to meditate is actually not even a significant word. So in that case, it's just kind of a word that, doesn't really mean anything to you, but still just focusing on it can really help. This is actually something called Autogenic Training, which is really interesting, and it's where you can teach your body and your brain basically to relax based on your words. So the words that you say over and over again repetitively can actually change how you feel, can relax you. And there is so much published research on this. This is not just something that some people do that works for some. It really, really is great. So mantras are something that you can do in the morning. This is also a great prevention one. If you feel like you are starting to feel off or you're in moments of stress, sometimes you can have a stressful or a short-term bout of depression, and it can end up being long-term. So of course, short-term, if something terrible happens in your life, if it's circumstantial, I would really recommend trying these mantras to calm you down. There's a few that I think are really interesting that you could try for phrases, and knowing, for example, saying this too shall pass, this too shall pass, thinking this in your head, or thinking this is just a moment of suffering. Thinking those phrases, I think, really brings you down to everything passes. Every emotion you're feeling eventually with time will pass. Every moment is gone in a moment and it will pass. So I think having that connection to it and realizing that this is just a moment in time and you will get better and you will heal can really, really help with mantras. Of course, everything's based on anyone's, specific life circumstance, but mantras are great whether you feel depression, whether you don't. I would really recommend trying them. So the next category I want to get into is food and supplement, and specifically omegas. So there is a huge link with omegas and depression, omegas and cortisol, and how, it can really affect you. A lot of people that are on antidepressant medications, if for some reason it's not working and they add omegas, specifically EHA and DPA, this can really help with depression. It can help with your symptoms. There are some studies on just the omegas alone, not quite as much, but just because there isn't research on something yet doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work for some people. It might work better in conjunction, but if you're not taking an antidepressant and you want to give this a try, if you haven't, it's definitely worth considering even adding into your diet. I always say too, for prevention purposes, I'm a huge believer in getting regular blood tests, specifically a micronutrient test, which tests much deeper than your standard blood test. It really checks like how your cells are absorbing everything. So versus what's just floating around in your blood, this is actually going to test in your cells. And let's say your omegas are low, maybe you supplement because you want to prevent it, especially if you're someone that maybe it runs in your family. I personally love walnuts. I always buy them raw, unsalted, unroasted, just because they are in their purest form and you're gonna get the most benefit out of them. And adding too much salt to your diet isn't a good thing. So I like getting them raw. You can also soak them, basically soak them for anywhere from an hour to overnight, and that kind of helps sprout them and you're gonna even digest them more. So those are little tips you can do to make sure you're getting the most out of them. When it comes to omegas in general, if you want to take a supplement, there's vegan ones you can get, there's algae-based ones, there's fish oils. It all depends on what works best for your lifestyle. The doses that have been studied are about 1 to 2 grams a day of EPA and DHA, so that's something you could aim for. Of course, talk to your doctor or pharmacist, but this is something you can get over the counter. I wanted to also share this option of flaxseed oil because I know a lot of people don't like taking pills, especially if you have like numerous vitamins. Like even for me, I actually hate swallowing pills. I always feel like they get stuck in my throat. So an oil could be really great. You don't even taste it. I wouldn't recommend cooking the oil. You want to keep it intact. You could drizzle it over some oatmeal. You could put it into a smoothie. You won't even notice it. That's also a great option. Another supplement I want to talk about here is called SAM-E. So this is a natural supplement that you can find over the counter. It's actually interesting because the ingredient in here you make in your body, you naturally produce, but sometimes you're not producing it enough, or sometimes there's just, there's so many things that could be going on in your body. I mean, oftentimes a lot of things that you take, you do produce in your body also, but maybe not at the amount it should be. Basically, what it does is end up increasing your serotonin. Serotonin, a lot of people kind of associate with like the happy neurotransmitter, the happy chemical. It has worked for a lot of people. It's also not worked for a lot of people. So I just want to make sure I share that, which is so many medications. There's so many antidepressants that work for some and don't work for others, but it is a more natural alternative than getting a prescription. Even though it is natural and it's over the counter, you definitely have to talk to your doctor about it because natural can still be extremely potent. It can have a lot of drug interactions, so it depends on what you're taking. So still take it just as seriously. In fact, in Europe, it's been used as a prescription. I'm not sure right now if they do, but for the most part, it has where it's prescription. We have different regulations and things, so check with your doctor before taking it, but it is a more natural alternative. So just to kind of recap how these work, we've got the omegas here, the chia seed, the walnut, the flax oil, or the supplement. These really work by lowering your cortisol, and the lower cortisol is linked to lower depression. So that's one way of handling it. Whereas SAM-E works very differently, and it works to increase your serotonin. So it's also interesting because people might have depression for different reasons. So more reason to get your blood tested. You can actually do swabs and check your cortisol. There is a test you can do, which I will link below for anyone who's interested. I've done it before too. You basically swab your mouth throughout like different times of the day, and you check like how your cortisol is, if it's high certain times or low certain times, and you can see how it is. So there's always things that you can do to test and know, but finding out what's causing your depression first is a huge factor. And just to kind of throw in a little tangent, maybe what's causing your depression is completely circumstantial. Like maybe you're really unhappy in a relationship. Maybe you feel bad about like your body. Maybe you're not like active enough. So really nailing that down and figuring it out will help, because let's say you're in a really bad relationship, but you can't figure out that's making you depressed. Then you go see a psychiatrist and they're like, let's put you on an antidepressant. That with the bad relationship is still not going to help it. So this is why it's so important to find a doctor who looks at every single aspect of your life and that you kind of take charge and look at that too. And then the third category is also back to lowering cortisol, which is yoga. So yoga is just a great practice I would recommend it to literally anyone. It's so great for you. It helps lower your cortisol. Again, that's linked to lowering depression. I think besides, the scientific part of it of lowering your cortisol, getting active and going to a yoga practice is just so relaxing in itself and can really bring you, even if it's just that temporary state of peace while you're there. I find it so helpful. One thing I've always really liked about yoga is that even though it's like, kind of an exercise, it's really, there's so much of your inner health that it helps. Like every twist is like, helping your digestion, helping your blood flow. When you're in an inversion, it's helping your blood flow. Like there's so many different things that it's doing. And I think that when I first started yoga, I was like, this is a waste of an hour. I'm not getting a good workout, because I was so grouping it in a different category. I wanted to like feel that burn and like get sore. And if you're doing it like the right way and really squeezing, it is definitely really challenging. But when you look at it as something you're doing for your health versus like, this is my workout necessarily, you have a totally different mentality towards it, and it just has so many different benefits. Okay guys, I hope this video was helpful. Again, this was a little more focused on cortisol for the most part, but there's so many different topics we could get into for mental well-being. I think it's so, so important and should be everyone's number one priority, whether it's therapy, life coaching, mantras, diet, supplements. There's so many different ways to, focus on it and tackle it, but it should definitely be made your first priority, because without your happiness, that's the most important thing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please leave any questions in the comments. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.